Prophet Muhammad grew up in an environment that's somewhat similar and reflects the situation in our neighborhoods and the inner communities. He grew up in a situation where there was no particular code to follow. He grew up in a situation where people were backstabbing, double-crossing, robbing, stealing,
Those tribal
jacking.
affiliations that the Arabs had back then was equivalent to many of our folks' infatuation with gang affiliations, fraternal orders, and so forth. Even though the folks looked the same, dressed the same culture, those labels prevented them from working together. Now, does that sound familiar? So the Prophet comes with Islam, which doesn't eradicate those tribal affiliations, but Islam essentially deprioritizes those affiliations and unites them under the banner of Tawheed.
Number one, Prophet Muhammad was a primary example of what a real man is about. You know, Prophet Muhammad was a courageous man. You know, he was very protective, you know, of the weak and the oppressed. And so following his example would enable us to throw off the yokes of white supremacy and the oppressive forces that's dominating and ruling the black community today.
Is that we'll find many factors in his upbringing and society in which we can identify with. Those of which would be that Prophet Muhammad grew up in an environment that was very cutthroat, very dog-eat-dog type of environment. You know, he grew up around, you know, pimps and prostitutes, just like we grew up around pimps and prostitutes in the inner city. Some of his most closest associates and lieutenants were from amongst the downtrodden, were from amongst the oppressed, or the homeless, the impoverished, and things of that nature. Those who didn't consider to have, those who weren't deemed to have any type of promising future. And with Prophet Muhammad, he had a message to reform them. He had a message to reform the prostitute. He had a message to reform the pimp who was exploiting the prostitute. And this message is what the oppressed and the downtrodden rallied behind. They rallied behind this new message brought by Prophet Muhammad, which was to restore the self-determination of the people. Prophet Muhammad asserted that Islam meant equality, justice, and a right to self-determination. And there was amongst them many black companions. And this impact and influence more so has touched Africa and those of us of African descent in the diaspora here. And once we study the life of Prophet Muhammad, we'll start to see him as one of our own. He won't no longer be this foreign personality that is seen to have no type of connection to African heritage. And we'll begin to embrace him and see him as one of our own, like I said, just as such of our revolutionary thinkers, historians, and writers before us have. An example of which would be Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was a man who was very highly impacted by the life of Prophet Muhammad, as to where Garvey went to the extent where he even compared his struggle to the struggle of Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century. And Garvey himself has mentioned Prophet Muhammad numerous times in his lectures, as to the UNIA and Garvey himself was so influenced by the life of Prophet Muhammad and his message that in 1922 the UNIA itself had a convention to decide whether or not they were going to make Islam its official religion. And so that tells of the high influence and impact that Prophet Muhammad's life and his life and his message have had on black people. Even furthermore, if we go back into the rebellions in Haiti, the rebellions in Brazil, we would see the same type of influence.
Prophet Muhammad. Well, if we were to look at the Prophet's life, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, we see that the Prophet was known as a person that was trustworthy and kind before prophethood. His neighbors and friends were aware of his character. They were cognizant of him being a peacemaker, someone who would resolve the disputes of people, someone with a good reputation in his community. Now, when he received the revelation, many of his people turned their back on him. And this is something that was surprising to Prophet Muhammad. And his wife and confidant Khadija, may Allah be pleased with her, was constantly in his corner, consistently down for the cause. She was ever so willing to make sacrifices for the cause of Islam. He conveyed the revelation to his people with kindness and patience. And his people ended up boycotting him, beating him, ridiculing him. And some of the members of his family did so as well. They even got to the point where some of his followers were killed, and they even tried to kill Prophet Muhammad as well. Then what does he do? He's forced to make the migration to Medina, and they had to interact with people who resembled them, but they had different customs, different ways of doing things. They had to develop their own community away from the Jahiliyyah in Mecca. Those tribal affiliations that the Arabs had back then was equivalent to many of our folks' infatuation with gang affiliations, fraternal orders, and so forth. Even though the folks looked the same, dressed the same culture, those labels prevented them from working together. Now, does that sound familiar? So the Prophet comes with Islam, which doesn't eradicate those tribal affiliations, but Islam essentially deprioritizes those affiliations and unites them under the banner of Tawheed. But when the Prophet passed away, after all that was done to unite the people under Islam, what did the Arabs do? They re-embraced Jahiliyyah. They reprioritized their tribal affiliations. They refused to pay the zakat and these other things. Then what happens? They had these ensuing battles with the forces of white supremacy with the Byzantines and the Persians, whom were the quote-unquote Aryan powers of that age. Did they say, okay, some of our people have gone back to Jahiliyyah, forget about them. We still got to go get these Romans? No. They said we got to rid our community of the Jahiliyyah first and foremost and unite our folks, and then we go and defeat the forces of white supremacy with the Romans and the Persians. Now, look at us in our situation. Many of our people are on this universalism stuff, and this dilutes our agenda and transformation of our black communities while we're trying to include everyone in our struggle. Meanwhile, our voice gets ignored in the process. The Prophet was sent first to unite and transform his own people, and then after this mission was accomplished, they can go out and impact the world globally. One of the things that we need to do with Islam is to utilize the deen to rectify our ills holistically. That's socially, economically, spiritually. And once that mission is accomplished, perhaps we can transform the world with Islam. But we cannot build anyone else's community until we build one for ourselves. And that's what the Prophet did.